Pete Souza had done this exact job 100 times. Pull the warped paneling, check the cavity, move to the next section. He started on the staircase that Tuesday morning, expecting to be finished before noon. The house on Clover Street was a post-war bungalow, solid bones, tired surfaces. His pry bar went in clean on the first section. The second section, lower down, took more effort. The wood had swelled against something behind it. He worked the bar along the edge. The panel gave. What he smelled first, before he saw anything, was the particular cold stillness of something that had been sealed for a very long time. Then he angled his work light into the space that opened up. And what he found stopped him so completely that he didn't move for almost a full minute. Someone had built a wall back there. Brick and mortar, floor to ceiling. The joints were uneven. The mortar was a different color. The work was fast. It was not a renovation. Pete Souza took out his phone. He photographed what he'd found. He sent the photographs to the Harmons. And then, because 20 years of residential work had not prepared him for this, he called the police. What was behind that wall had been waiting there since 1953. Stay with us, because what someone sealed inside that house, beneath those stairs, is more than anyone on that block was prepared to reckon with. Before we go back there, before we go to what was found, you need to know who she was. Because she wasn't a case file. She was 29 years old. And the word that everyone used when they tried to describe her years later was steady. Not brilliant. Not the kind of woman who demanded a room's attention, but the kind whose presence made the room work better, as though things were slightly more likely to go right with her in them. If you've ever known someone like that, you already understand exactly what was lost on Clover Street. She had been born in 1924 in the Bevo Mill neighborhood of South St. Louis. Her father worked in a glass factory. Her mother took in alterations. Sarah was the eldest of three, and she had grown up understanding, without needing to be told, that the household ran better when she paid attention to it. She carried that quality into everything she did. By the early 1950s, she was working as a substitute teacher in the Maplewood district. The principal requested her by name. She was good with children in the specific way that comes not from sentimentality, but from genuine patience. She listened to them. She remembered what they had told her the week before. She had married David Miller in June of 1951. David was a telephone technician, a man who spent his days climbing poles across St. Louis County and his evenings slowly making the bungalow on Clover Street into something worth coming home to. On the morning of their wedding, he gave her a watch. Silver, with a narrow face and a winding crown on the right side. And on the back, he'd had a date engraved in a small, careful hand. The 14th of June, 1951. Sarah wore it every day. Her left wrist always. People who knew her said she touched it sometimes, absently, the way people touch things that mean something without meaning to show that they do. Thursday, the 22nd of October, 1953 was the last day anyone saw Sarah Thompson alive. David left for work at 7 in the morning. A neighbor, Mrs. Loretta Briggs, saw Sarah on the front porch at around 9:30, shaking out a small rug. They exchanged a few words about the cold snap that had moved in overnight. Sarah went back inside. David came home at 6:15 to a house that was completely, unnervingly normal and completely, unnervingly empty. Dinner on the stove, her coat on the hook by the door, her purse on the kitchen counter, and inside it her billfold, her keys, a folded shopping list she had not yet used. No note, no sign of struggle, simply no Sarah. She was 12 minutes from her parents' house. She never arrived. Thursday, the 22nd of October, 1953 had come in cold and gray, a low sky that pressed down on the neighborhoods like a lid. The temperature at dawn was 31 degrees. By mid-morning, it had reached 38, not enough to make anyone comfortable, and a thin wind moved steadily out of the northwest, carrying the smell of dead leaves and chimney smoke. It was a day designed to keep people indoors. David Miller left the house at 5 minutes past 7. He remembered the exact time because he had checked his watch against the kitchen clock before stepping outside, a habit he'd built to stay on schedule for his first call of the day. Sarah was in the kitchen when he left, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, still in her house dress. They spoke briefly. Nothing consequential, nothing that either of them would have remembered as important. He kissed her goodbye at the door. She told him to wear his heavier jacket. He didn't. The truck had heat. He would spend the rest of his life wishing that conversation had been longer. At approximately 9:30 that morning, Mrs. Loretta Briggs saw Sarah on the front porch, shaking out a small wool rug over the railing. The kind of ordinary domestic task that takes 2 minutes and is forgotten immediately. Mrs. Briggs called out to mention the cold. Sarah agreed about the cold. Mrs. Briggs went back inside. That was the last confirmed sighting. David arrived home at 6:15 in the evening. He noticed immediately that the porch light was off. Sarah always turned it on by 5 in the darker months before he got home. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was entirely undisturbed. The pot on the stove contained a beef and potato soup that had been cooking long enough to reduce considerably, but had not yet burned. Sarah's gray wool coat was on the hook beside the door. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, and inside it, her billfold, her keys, and a folded shopping list she had not yet used. No note, no sign of struggle. He waited 20 minutes before calling anyone. He would later describe that with quiet shame. He kept expecting to hear her footsteps on the back porch, kept building explanations that would make the situation ordinary. When none came, he telephoned his mother-in-law on Schiller Avenue. Sarah had not been there. He telephoned the neighbor on the south side. No one had seen anything. By 7 o'clock, he was at the Delwood Police Department, sitting across a desk from a duty officer who wrote down what David told him with the unhurried manner of someone who had heard this kind of story before and knew how it usually ended. In the department's experience, this kind of thing usually ended with the woman turning up at a relative's house, having made a decision she hadn't yet shared with her husband. That was the working assumption from the first hour of the investigation, and it persisted with diminishing justification for weeks. David Miller was 33 years old. His wife had disappeared without her coat, her purse, or her keys on a 38-degree October afternoon. Nobody pushed hard enough. Not for weeks. Not until Sarah's father, a man named Stanislaw Thompson, who had spent 30 years not asking American institutions for anything, walked into the precinct on the third day and refused to leave until someone with more authority than a desk sergeant agreed to speak with him. A broader search was organized that second weekend. Volunteers from the parish Sarah's family walked the creek bed that ran behind the properties on the east side of Clover Street. The Delwood Fire Department contributed 2 men and a truck. Nothing was found. Sarah's coat was still on its hook. Her soup had long since been thrown out, which David would later say bothered him in a way he couldn't fully articulate, as though discarding it had closed something that should have been left open. Attention turned, in the investigation's second week, to a man named Christopher Jones. Jones was 41, unmarried, and had lived in the house immediately to the south of the Millers' property for 6 years. Before Sarah's marriage to David, Jones had made his interest in her known through a series of gestures that she had described to at least 2 friends as persistent and unwelcome, turning up at her parents' house on the pretext of returning borrowed tools, leaving items on their porch, finding reasons to be present when she was expected. She had handled the situation by marrying David and moving to Clover Street, which had placed her, as it turned out, directly next door to the man she'd been hoping to put distance between herself and. And here's the part that stays with you. In the days immediately following Sarah's disappearance, neighbors saw Jones moving building materials between properties after dark. Bricks, a bag of dry mortar, lengths of timber. Nobody thought anything of it. He was just a man doing work. 3 weeks after Sarah vanished, Jones told his employer he was taking personal time and drove north. He was gone for 11 days. When he returned, the department put one follow-up question to him. Had he seen or heard anything unusual on the afternoon of October 22nd? He said no, and that was the end of his formal involvement in the investigation. By December of 1953, the active file had grown thin. A detective's summary noted, with the economy of a man who had too many cases, that without physical evidence or witnesses the matter had reached an investigative limit. The file was not closed. It went to a shelf in a room that smelled of dust and old paper. And the years began to move over it the way years do, steadily. Without looking back, David Miller did not leave Delwood. That was the detail people remarked on in the years that followed. The fact that he stayed in the house on Clover Street, next door to Christopher Jones, on the same block where his wife had vanished, in the same rooms where her coat still hung on its hook for longer than was perhaps reasonable. He stayed because leaving felt like a declaration he wasn't prepared to make. He stayed because he believed, for longer than the evidence warranted, that she would come back. He stayed until staying was the only thing left to do. Stanislaw Thompson continued to push the Delwood Police Department for years. He wrote letters. He appeared in person. He found a state representative willing to ask a question in writing and received a written answer that said nothing. He wrote more letters. For years. For years. In 1957, a brief reinvestigation was opened after a detective new to the department reviewed the file and found the Christopher Jones detail worth following. Jones was interviewed a second time. He was cooperative and unhurried. He had no alibi for the afternoon of October 22nd beyond his own word, but there was nothing to contradict his word either, and nothing physical to connect him to Sarah's disappearance. The reinvestigation was closed within 4 months. Christopher Jones sold his house in 1969 and moved to a retirement community outside Jefferson City. He died there in 1987, 75 years old. Cardiac failure. Never charged. Never. David Miller died in 1978. Stanislaw Thompson outlived them both, dying in 1981 at the age of 83. Still without an answer. The house on Clover Street didn't know any of that. Houses don't know things. 3 more families came through after David. They painted the banisters in the 80s. They replaced a baluster in the 90s. None of them touched the wall beneath the stairs. In January of 2024, a couple named Harmon bought it for $147,000. And in the first week of March, they hired a contractor named Pete Souza to start on the repairs. He started on the staircase on a Tuesday. The first section of paneling came away cleanly enough. The second section, lower down, required more effort. He worked a pry bar along the edge before it gave. The St. Louis County Major Crimes Unit arrived that afternoon. The wall was opened carefully in sections, with the understanding that whatever was inside needed to be treated as a potential crime scene. What 70 years does to a body in a sealed residential space, that's what they found. Fragmented, partially mineralized. No intact arrangement remained. The forensic anthropologist confirmed the remains were human, likely an adult female. And then, on the floor of the cavity, beneath a layer of fine gray dust, a watch, silver, narrow-faced, winding crown on the right side. The crystal was cracked. The mechanism had long since stopped. But on the back of the case, still legible beneath the oxidation, a date had been engraved in a small, careful hand. The 14th of June, 1951. The detective assigned to the scene looked at that date for a long time before he ran it. When the records came back, and the name came back with them, he sat with it for a moment. In the way people do when something that has been lost for a very long time is suddenly, irreversibly found. Sarah and Thompson, missing since October 22nd, 1953. Last seen on the front porch of the very house where, 71 years later, she had just been found. The DNA recovered from the bone fragments was too degraded after 7 decades to produce a conclusive identification. That was expected. What nobody allowed themselves to expect was the watch. Silver resists. That's the chemistry of it. Silver resists decomposition in ways other metals don't. The engraving had survived 7 decades in the dark, in a sealed cavity, in a house that had passed through 3 different families and decades of routine. The date was still there, as though the watch had decided, on its own terms, to remain readable, to wait. The 14th of June, 1951 was the date of record in the St. Louis County Marriage Register for the union of David Allen Miller and Sarah and Thompson. The watch appeared in 2 photographs from their wedding, visible on Sarah's left wrist in both. A neighbor who had given a statement to police in October of 1953 described it specifically. The silver case, the narrow face, the way Sarah touched it, sometimes without seeming to notice she was doing it. It was enough. It was her. A death certificate was issued for Sarah and Thompson. Date of death, on or about October 22nd, 1953. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. Sarah's surviving relatives, a niece and two great-nephews, descendants of her younger brother, were notified and attended a private ceremony that autumn. What remained of Sarah Thompson was given a burial that had not been guaranteed 71 years earlier. Christopher Jones is dead. The house he lived in, the one directly to the south of the property on Clover Street where Sarah was found, was sold after his death and demolished in 2011 to make way for a drainage project. There is nothing there now but a stretch of grass and a concrete culvert. The questions that remain: exactly what happened inside the house on Clover Street on the afternoon of October 22, 1953, are questions the record cannot answer. What the record can say is this: a woman left her front porch on a cold October morning and never came back. For 71 years, the watch her husband gave her on their wedding day kept that secret in the dark, on the other side of a wall that should never have been built. Her name was Sarah.